Good evening, everyone, once again. So as Debbie said, my name is Ciku Mugambi. I currently work as the COO at KOBO 360, and I've been working with tech startups in both an investment and operational capacity for the last 6 years. I'm really excited to join this masterclass today and share my experience, having worked at KOBO now for about 1.5 years on, setting up back office operations. So I'll just start off with a quick definition on what a back office is. So effectively, a back office are teams within a company that are supporting client-facing teams. So think of client-facing teams as teams that are serving external customers, and back office teams as teams that are supporting internal customers. So basically the staff within the company. So this can include teams like finance, HR, admin, legal, marketing, customer support, IT services, and so on and so forth. And every company will tend to have its own teams based on what its needs are. So it's really important to articulate and clearly articulate what your product offering is and understand all the processes that need to be in place for you to deliver that product in order to understand what teams are needed to fulfill those processes and whether those teams are internal facing or external facing. And that can help you to basically more effectively set up your org structure. And you'll find that sometimes there could be nuances with certain teams. For example, a tech department or even a finance department can be both a front office team as well as a back office team. It just depends on the nature of your business and your product offering and what exact responsibilities those teams are fulfilling in the processes that you need to go through to deliver your product. Next slide, please. So I just laid off a typical org structure here. If you were to bifurcate departments within a company, front office staff would typically be like sales staff, operations staff, tech staff, and all the other teams that I mentioned earlier would typically be back office staff. So because we don't really have too much time, I decided to focus this presentation mainly on setting up finance and HR teams and just going into like how companies should think through this. And then I'll quickly run through the remaining departments and then just give you pointers in general on how to ensure that back office teams work seamlessly with the rest of the organization. So I wanted to just go into a deep dive on how to think through setting up a finance function. I think that a finance function can actually be both a front office function as well as a back office function. It just depends on the nature of the business, particularly for fintech companies or companies that offer some form of embedded financing. Then the finance function actually can be a front office function. And the normal financial operations staff will then fall into the back office category. So if you think through the key roles or tasks that a finance function is supposed to perform, I've tried to list them into these 5 buckets that you have here. So you have what I'm calling like the liquidity engine of the company. So basically, the function here is being able to generate or raise the capital that the business needs to do what it needs to do. And then you have the credit risk assessment function, financial reporting and analysis, financial operations, and tax management. When you go into each of them, right? So I'll start with the liquidity engine function. So this is effectively the strategic finance arm of the business, right? And the role here is to generate the capital that the business needs to run, right? And this can be both debt capital or equity capital. For fintech companies or companies that have an embedded finance function, you find that this division of the finance team will be a core part of the product development team. because they're now basically creating the pathway through which the money that the business needs to either on lend, for example, if you're a digital lending business, they're an integral part of how that product development goes. Because once you set up the tech, you then need to integrate the tech with, say, a banking solution or a debt capital provider that can now be the avenue through which the startup can tap into that debt capital to on-lend to its users. So in that sense, it's actually a client-facing function, and hence it's a front office function. So when you're thinking through how to set up a division like this in your department, and you can call it whatever you want to call it, some of the key success factors of people who should be in that team is like basically how you should measure their success is how much capital have they been able to raise, whether it's debt, equity, or quasi-equity, and then how seamlessly has the tech platform that you're running integrated with the financing provider. Now, this is particularly important for, say, digital lenders or companies that are offering financing as a product, right? You find that, for example, for us, we provide working capital solutions to transporters who are running trips on our platform. And we are integrated to the banks that we are partnering with, who have now extended working capital facilities to us. So the finance team is the one that is responsible for managing that relationship with the bank, managing the integration and ensuring that that is working seamlessly, and making sure that the payments are following through seamlessly through our platform to our transporters. Another key success factor is this precision in cash flow forecasting. Now, this is very, very important, especially for a lot of tech startups that are not yet sustainable or break even. So being able to accurately and precisely predict both your cash inflows and cash outflows is an important and integral part of this division of finance. And these are essentially the people who will be able to tell you, you're going to run out of money by this time. And hence you need to think through what do you need to do to be able to finance your runway thereafter, right? So these are very, very important. So actually a very, very important part of that division. And then finally, it's presentation of the company's financial position in the best light. So typically, finance functions would be part of the team that will work on, say, your pitch deck. So being able to present the historical performance and the traction that the startup has been able to achieve, and doing that in the best light. I think most people here are operators. So, for example, like this year, the macro challenges have been really, really difficult. For us, we weren't able to hit our projections for February because of the elections in Nigeria. But the finance function should now be able to present that dip, but in a way that is, still cast the business in the best light. It's in some ways also like part of the marketing team of the company. So the other thing I try to do here is to think through, if you're to hire people for these roles, what's the level of specialization that you need for this role? So for the liquidity engine or the division that is responsible for basically cash flow management or liquidity of the business, I would say you need a high level of specialization. So you need people who are fairly experienced, who've had experience in mobilizing debt capital, leveraging relationships that they already have with banking partners or other debt capital providers, people who have strong relationships with, say, the investor community, and people who are able to speak that kind of language. Particularly when it comes to that precision in cash flow forecasting, you need someone who is on top of it. And so the level of specialization there is high. This could be someone that you have in-house, or it could also be someone that you work with on a contractual basis, but it's someone that you need to make sure really knows what they're doing. Then the second bucket that I have there is credit risk assessment. And this again is more focused on companies that are either fintech companies or offer some form of credit products. You obviously want to be able to do a proper credit risk assessment on the people that you're lending money to make sure you get the money back. So this function is very, very essential to that. They are also critical to the product development team, right? Especially for financial products, because they're the people who effectively, filter out the users of your platform. Key success factors here would be an in-depth understanding of the nuances of the company's users. So, you want to be able to strike a balance between being able to minimize your credit losses, as well as being practical around the profile of the users of your products. So, for example, if I am a digital lending platform and I'm lending money to, say, informal retailers, and I'm asking them to provide very extensive KYC documentation, which most likely they do not have given their informal nature. So you want to be able to bridge the gap between their informality as well as your understanding of their credit worthiness, right? So you don't want them to lock out users who may not necessarily meet your standard definition of what a proper borrower should look like, but are still good borrowers and could still be good users of your platform. Another key success factor is that they minimize credit losses. That goes without saying. And then you're also looking for people who have that degree of flexibility and agility that I mentioned earlier, right? So you want people who are realists, right? But at the same time, also they're risk adverse as well. So it's a good balance between risk aversion and realism. For the level of specialization that you need here, I would say it's moderate to high. I think you can get by with people who are not too experienced, but are analytical, flexible, agile, and have a good understanding of your user base. Especially if you're not a well-funded startup, you're still very early on in your startup cycle, so you can't necessarily afford like very, very expensive stuff. So you can work with people who are not necessarily too experienced for this. Then for the remaining buckets, these are purely back office functions. So the first one is financial reporting and analysis. So these are the people who ensure that every single activity within the company is properly recorded, and the financial impact of every single activity is properly recorded. So they churn out financial reports for various users, right? Whether it's management, whether it's investors, tax authorities, auditors, etc. The core function of these guys is not only to just present those numbers, but also to analyze them and glean insights that can be useful for management for various strategic decisions that they need to make. Key success factors are people who can prepare timely and accurate reports. It's very important to be able to have real-time insights on the financial impact of the decisions and the strategies that you're pursuing as a startup. So you need people who can be able to give you real-time data, right? That is accurate, especially. And so that's one very, very important success factor here. And then on top of that, if you're able to get people who can produce this data and analyze it and give you insights that can inform management decisions, that's really, really fantastic. It also this is also a very important way for a company to present itself in the best light. When you prepare timely and accurate reports and that are well analyzed, it obviously reflects very, very positively on you. For this, I would say the level of specialization needed is moderate. You don't necessarily need to have very senior, very expensive staff doing this. There are very, very smart young people out there, even people with 2-3 years worth of experience, who can be able to do this work and do this work well. And then financial operations, these are the people who manage the day-to-day payments and receipts within the company. So any money that's coming in from your users or any money that's going out, the people that manage that are effectively financial operations. So this includes teams like receivables teams, payables teams, collection specialists, and there's a few other kind of divisions within the finance function that would fall within this bracket. So what you need from people who are doing this work is people who have a high degree of accuracy, right? You don't want people who are managing your cash inflows and cash outflows and they're making mistakes, right? Because obviously that's your money that's either not being handled properly or potentially even being misappropriated. So you want people who are very, very accurate in their work, people who can work fast as well, right? Because if you're a company that has high volumes of transactions, especially if you're not fully automated as yet, then you need speed. The worst thing that you can have, especially for companies like ours that are dealing with enterprise clients, is a backlog of transactions or say invoices that need to be booked. That's just a recipe for disaster. And so speed of execution is important, and agility as a result of that is also important. You also want proactive staff who get things done, especially if you're dealing with enterprise clients, again, like us. They will push you to do whatever they want to do. For example, we initially always had to comply with the credit terms of our customers. And some of those credit terms are not favorable for us. Like some of them would be like 60 days. And you're like, I can't wait for my money for 60 days. But it's proactive staff who can push and make sure that those companies understand our business and our cash cycle and can comply with our, or at least meet us halfway, right, when it comes to our credit cycle. For this, you need low to moderate staff. What you do need, however, is at least one middle-level manager who can work with junior staff and make sure that they train them well and they're checking what they're doing and they're making sure that they're ramping up. Tax management. So this effectively would be teams that are ensuring compliance with all requirements of tax authorities in the jurisdictions that you operate. So what you need here is people who can ensure full compliance. But I say this with, I want to caveat this. I think it's very difficult for startups to be fully compliant with tax requirements, especially because I feel tax authorities in many markets that we operate in are still wrapping their heads around the business models that startups are operating. And as a result, they're still trying to figure out how to tax them. So it's possible for you not to be fully compliant, even if you have the intentionality to do so. So a key success factor here would be people who have the ability to negotiate with tax authorities and help them better understand your business, your revenue model, and the resultant tax implications, right? So for this, I wouldn't say you can't work with low-level staff. You need either moderate staff, or you can even potentially outsource this to tax consultants who can support you. So that's it on finance. We can go into HR. I think we can maybe take questions in the end, or I don't know how you want to run this, but maybe we can do questions in the end. So maybe we can look at HR. Next slide, please. Okay. So similar to that, so HR is one function that I've increasingly realized is a very, very important function in startups. It's a very actually strategic role within startups. But unfortunately, many companies think of HR functions as from an operational perspective or from a back office perspective, which is what we're discussing today. But I think that HR functions are actually a very strategic unit within a startup. And especially when you think about the fact that for most startups, payroll costs are their biggest cost base, right? And so you want to be very, very careful about how you're utilizing your runway for this important cost base and making sure you're getting the most out of it, right? Because if you're going to be spending so much money, you need to make sure that you're getting the most out of it. So I divided this into 6 buckets. I couldn't think of an appropriate term for the first bucket, so I just called it people matching. But I'm pretty sure you can get creative on how to name this. So effectively, this is a unit within HR or a person within HR that sits down with senior management to understand what the company is focusing on strategically, and have this broken down, say, on a quarterly basis or an annual basis, and then sitting down with management to think, okay, so this is what we're trying to achieve. So who do I need to be able to do that? And it's not even necessarily who, it's what are the skill sets or what are the attributes of the person that I need to be able to achieve this specific objective, right? So that's why I put down there a bucket called desired outcome. So these are people who know who the company needs. What's the profile of the person that the company needs, right? And hence, one of the key success factors there is accurate job profiling. So you're able to say, okay, like I can use KOBO as an example once again and say, okay, I'm trying to crack my supply function. Our biggest challenge is being able to increase our supply of trucks. So what are the attributes that I need to be able to do that? What kind of a person do I need, right? So if I understand the landscape of transporters in the countries that I operate, I know they are informal. I know they're spread out across multiple parts of the country. I know that they require a high degree of relationship management. And so I now think, okay, so what are the people that, what's the kind of person that I need to be able to unlock that? So you need someone who, for example, speaks the kind of language that they speak because they're very informal, they're very relationship oriented. So they need familiarity at that level. So you need someone who understands local dialect, for example. You need someone who's very familiar with the geographical spread of the country that you're working in, because transporters are all over, they're spread out all over the country, right? Someone who has an understanding of multiple geographical zones in the country is also an important attribute. You also need someone who is able to, who has grit, because logistics is a very difficult business and dealing with transporters can be very overwhelming. So grit is a very important attribute. So this is where especially that strategic aspect of HR comes into play, because it's now their responsibility to carve out basically a role that will be the person responsible for executing the strategic objectives of the company. Then the second bucket is recruitment. So now once you know who you need, you now need to know, where am I going to find this person, right? So recruitment is the second bucket. And I don't know if you've been paying attention to, a lot of the layoffs that have happened in global tech companies have been recruitment teams within HR, because some of these companies that have been well-funded in the past actually have dedicated recruitment people within HR, right? So it's not easy to find that in Kenya, but these days you have, not in Kenya, in Africa really, is you don't really find people within HR whose only responsibility is recruitment, right? But effectively, once you know who the company needs, you now need people who are responsible for actually finding those people. So their responsibility is sourcing and bringing on board key talents needed to fulfill the company's objectives. And then another important thing is also managing how you onboard these people once they come in and making sure that they're properly integrated into the team. So this would be a key responsibility for this unit. What are key success factors for recruitment teams? One is strong networks to aid in sourcing for the right talent. You don't need senior roles. I find that it's also equally important to have good networks for middle-level management and even junior roles, right? It's not just networks for strong hires, for senior hires rather. You also need mission-oriented teams. So because these are the people who are helping you to actually source for the talent you need and bring them into the company, it's very important that these people understand the mission of the business and they bring on board people who are aligned with that mission, right? And who buy into that mission. Level of specialization needed here, I would say moderate to high. Again, this is another one of those very strategic elements of a HR function. And then the next bucket is people cost management. So these are effectively people who are keeping track of the money, right? So paying attention to payroll costs, and not just salaries, but all costs to the company for each employee working for the company, right? So this includes all their benefits, all statutory payments that the company needs to make on their behalf. So people who are monitoring that and monitoring the movement of that on a month-on-month basis. I'd like to emphasize this, especially in our current environment, where companies are now focused strongly on unit economics and sustainability. So because payroll is the most significant cost of most tech startups' income statements, this person is a very, very vital part of the team because they ensure that you're within budgets, you're not blowing up your budget, hiring a bunch of people, and they can circle back this information to especially the finance team that is responsible for cash flow management. Key success factors here is ability to optimize the company's human resources at a manageable price point. The important thing here, and this kind of is tied with the recruitment bucket, is you find, for example, once you understand, okay, so this is my strategic priority as a company. This is who I need to be able to fulfill that objective. This is where I can find them from. So the recruiters are now coming to help with that. But you might find that I could get the Rolls Royce of a resource, but I could also get the Toyota of the resource, as long as the company achieves the objective, right? It might be possible to achieve the same thing with much less expensive resources. And so the payroll or people cost management people will be able to help and guide the recruitment teams on that front. These days, it's all about achieving more with less, right? Another key success factor here is a technical and analytical mindset, right? Because there's a lot of analysis that is involved in this. And it's not just looking at the cost aspect of it. There's also looking and analyzing the productivity that you're getting from the people that are working for you, right? So are they being efficient? Are we spending more and getting less? Is there a way to get a lot more output from the teams that you have from a numbers perspective? So for that reason, you need someone who has a very analytical mindset. And the level of specialization needed here, I would say moderate to high, but I would tend towards the moderate. Performance management is the other important bucket here. So these are people who, now that you know this is what I'm trying to achieve, then the question is, how am I going to achieve that? What are the exact activities that I need to undertake in order to achieve my strategic objective, right? And once you itemize those activities, you then say, so what are the metrics that I'm going to use to evaluate whether these objectives are being achieved or not, right? And then how do I cascade that to everybody in the company? And how do I measure whether we are on track or whether we are not on track? So performance management is actually a very, very important aspect of a HR function. And on top of all of that, it's also important to identify what are the blockers, the things that are preventing the people in the company from achieving the desired outcomes that we need from them. The HR business partner function is a role that came up, I feel, as a result of this. So their objective is to embed themselves within the client-facing teams and understand what do they need to be able to be successful in their roles. So it's not just HR operations, it's very strategic and helping them to unlock and resolve those blockers so that they can continue to be successful. So the desired outcome here is someone who knows how to ensure that the company is getting the most of the people it has hired. And tied to this, I didn't mention this here, but tied to this is also people who now figure out a reward system, right? Because obviously if performance metrics are being met, then a reward system is also important to ensure people are motivated and they're actually participating in the value that they are creating, right? Key success factors here is a robust performance management process and system. Ideally should be very objective, should be very data-driven, should be very realistic, measurable, SMART goals as we all know them. And hence, it's everybody in the company knows exactly what is expected of them, right? Specialization needed here, I'd also say moderate to high. Then employee engagement is the next bucket. So here you just people who make sure that employees are well taken care of, right? They have their lunch, they have their transportation, they have a good place, a good working environment, and everything that they need is taken care of, right? So these are the people who know how to ensure that staff are motivated and aligned in fulfilling their duties. So these are also very, very important people because they help to enforce or foster a very positive company culture, right? When people feel good about where they work, then it drives productivity. And the employee engagement teams are the teams that are responsible for ensuring that people feel good about where they work. So they're also very, very important. They're also very important in building mission-oriented teams, right? So the constant communication, constant engagement, and constant reminders about the overall mission of the company help to drive mission-oriented teams. For this, you probably need low to moderate level staff. What you probably need is just junior resources that you can train over time and ramp them up gradually. Finally, the final bucket that I have here is HR operations. So these are people who ensure that all processes related to employee welfare are effectively carried out. So these are like now the actual tasks. For example, managing leave schedules, ensuring that statutory dues are deducted from payroll and remitted to the authorities. So it's basically the tasks, making sure that employee affairs are properly managed. Key success factors here would be compliance with all labor laws and complete and accurate employee records. For this, you need low to moderate staff. One important thing to say is for HR functions and even for the finance function, you don't necessarily need one person for each of these. The way I'm thinking about this is you need people with these skills, right? And it could be one person who has multiple of these skills. For example, you can have the employee engagement person also doing HR operations, supporting on performance management, right? So it's possible to lump a lot of these things into one or two people, or depending on how much funding you have, you can have 6 people. It's all up to you. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next bucket is other back office functions. So I kind of lumped the rest into just one slide, and I'll just quickly run through this. Maybe in a different environment, we can do deep dives on each of these buckets. Legal is an important back office function. And this is also a very important function for startups, especially startups that are still fundraising, right? There are a few different roles or tasks within the legal function, which I've listed here. Legal operations, so basically day-to-day legal activities, for example, contract management, litigation management, and so on and so forth. So you have people in the team who are responsible for that. Legal functions also provide regulatory support. So they ensure that the company is legally set up to offer the products or services that it offers, right? Fundraising support. So they oversee the structuring and documentation of all the company's fundraising activities, whether it's debt fundraise, equity fundraise. The legal function will be needed to support in that structuring and documentation. Then there's corporate governance, so ensuring that the company follows all the statutory requirements and regulatory filings in each of the markets it operates in, right? I'll move on to the next one, investor relations. So this is kind of tied into fundraising support. So these are this function effectively supporting engagements with the company's investor base. You have teams that are responsible for that financial engagement. So for example, sending monthly financial reports to investors, but sometimes you actually have legal teams that support in that, right? And then finally, managing external counsel. So, there's limitations on what in-house counsel are allowed to do based on the legal requirements of each country. So you almost always have to have external counsel on either retainer, or you can engage them on an ad hoc basis. And so the legal function's responsibility is to manage the external counsel and ensure that they're helping the company to get what it is it needs from them. So one important thing I wanted to flag when it comes to legal functions is For very early stage businesses, and also for many tech startups, there are a lot of things that you're not going to be able to fix at the same time. I think you guys know this very, very well. You're going to have 100 problems. You can't solve 100 problems, right? You don't have the bandwidth to solve 100 problems. And so I find that in many startups, for example, legal compliance, corporate governance are things that are usually lacking. And when I say corporate governance, I don't mean like the mechanisms around checking whether the company is doing what it's supposed to be doing and there are no issues around that. It's more around things like, have they filed their annual returns on an annual basis the way that they're supposed to, right? Have they filed, like in Nigeria, your CAC filing on an annual basis? Most likely you have not done that. And it's okay. I think it's just okay to know that you're not going to be able to resolve all your legal matters internally or in an expedient manner. And I actually would say that it is fine, right? It's important to be aware of everything that you need to do, but it's also okay to not be in a position to properly fulfill everything you need to fulfill at the same time. The focus should be really on the legal activities that minimize the company's exposure to financial liabilities, right? That should be top on your list. So what are the exposures that I have from a legal perspective? What's the financial implication of that? And I would now focus my energy and attention on the things that have the highest financial exposure. I'll give you an example. The way that we have our contracts set up with some of our customers exposes us financially because they classify us as like a truck owner or a company that owns its own fleet of trucks, whereas we are asset light, right? So from a liability exposure perspective, we'd be more exposed if we are taking on liabilities of our transporters, which we do not want to do, right? So we're going through an exercise right now to restructure our contracts and engage our customers to restructure our contracts to properly define who we are. Now, we are also not very on top of our filings that we need to do. So one thing I tell our legal team is we will not be able to get our filings done on time. Most likely we'll have to pay a fine, but the quantum of that fine versus the financial liability I'm exposed to because of the contracts not being drafted properly is minimal. So I'd rather you focus on that than focus on this. So I feel like that's an important point to raise when it comes to legal teams. So, level of specialization needed here, I would say moderate to low. And the reason I say this is because you are going to need external counsel. Tends to, have teams that can be able to manage external counsel, get cost-effective external counsel who can now support with all the legal activities that are needed. Quickly run through marketing. So these are people who ensure deep engagement with the customer's user base, investor community, and general public. Desired outcomes and key success factors are people who prioritize visibility, communication, and engagement with your user base, so your customers, the people who are using your platform. I think most startups, to be honest, especially early stage startups that are still kind of trying to get to product market fit, you may not have a big marketing budget, but you'd be surprised how effective and regular communication can help with brand visibility and brand building. And so that should be the priority. A key success factor is you need people who are creative. So you need someone who can make magic with a limited budget. And for this, you need moderate to low specialization. IT services are basically people who are making sure that people have the tools that they need to work, whether it's laptops, internet is working properly, not like the problems I had today. So basically people who are ensuring that everybody has what they need to work effectively, right? There's nothing as frustrating as having tech issues, right? So key success factors or a desired outcome here is low employee downtime due to non-functional tools, right? The worst thing is having staff who are not able to say meet timelines or actually work because their laptop is not working, right? So the other desired outcome here is employee satisfaction. I actually know in my former job when I was working at KPMG, we had an intern who resigned because his laptop was frustrating him. He went home for lunch and he sent a message saying, I'm not coming back because I struggle with this laptop and it's frustrating me. So employee satisfaction, IT services actually play a very, very critical role in employee satisfaction. I mean, I certainly know how. I can resonate with the guy because it's very frustrating. Level of specialization needed is moderate to low. And so that will do for that. You don't need very senior, expensive staff helping with this. Admin is people who ensure that staff are comfortable as they work. As I'm moving from one customer to another customer, do I have the transportation needed? Is my desk okay? Do I have a place to sit? Is the AC working properly? The admin people just ensure that staff are comfortable as they do their work. A desired outcome here is employee satisfaction and overall well-being, right? You don't want to be having your staff working in sweatshops, right? You want to make sure that they are comfortable, they have everything that they need, and they can be productive. Level of specialization needed here is moderate to low. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, there are few points that I thought I would just run through in general. So, back office staff are a very important function within a startup. And you want to make sure that you're setting them up for success and enabling them to work efficiently with all the other teams in the company. So first and foremost, you need to create a framework for how back office staff engage with front office staff. In some of the previous companies I've worked for, some departments actually have SLAs between each other, right? So for example, if I raise an issue that I'm having with my laptop, and like in KPMG, we had this, where I can't even remember what we called it, but there was a system where you'd raise an issue and say that, my laptop is not working. Then the IT department has a prescribed amount of time that they need to acknowledge my complaint and resolve it, right? And it's actually documented, right? So, I feel like that's quite intense, but having some form of a framework that governs how the different departments work with each other is important. And I'll go to the third bullet before I talk about the second bullet. Don't call your back office staff. Just don't call them that. No one likes to be called back office staff. I feel like it has a negative connotation to it. It's almost like you guys are the people at the back, right? We're the people who are running this show and driving the business. So it's important that everyone in the company feels that they are an important contributor to the overall mission of the company, right? You don't want to be having some people feeling like they are more important than others. The IT guy is a very important part of my job and my responsibility, right? If finance is not powering the way that they're supposed to be powering, I'm not able to pay my transporters on time, and they're frustrated. And if I'm the head of supply, it's going to make my work more difficult because the transporters will be complaining to me. So finance is very important, right? HR, they're the people who are literally building the teams that are working for the startups. They're very, very important. So this is where your creativity is important. Think of a name that better describes what they do and make sure that they understand that they're important in the company. And so going back to the second bullet is just how you do that is by constant engagement and communicating intentionally in the company so that everybody understands this is what we are trying to do as a company. These are the activities that we need to do to achieve this objective. And this is my individual contribution to this specific activity. But everything is tying in ultimately to the overall objective of the company. But that intentionality in how you engage and how you communicate is very important. And then take your time to build the right teams. This is one learning for me personally in the 1.5 years that I've been at KOBO, where sometimes you're very desperate to fill a role and you just just get somebody in there. Like we had a financial planning and analysis team we were trying to build soon after I joined, and we got someone who wasn't a good fit because we were desperate to just fill the role. But if you suffer the short-term pain, so I had to now do the work of like preparing, for example, the investor reports myself, doing the data analysis myself, but I took my time to source for someone who I knew can take that stuff off of my plate. And that's the most important thing. You want to bring on board people who will take things off of your plate, right? So I don't have to think about that work stream again. But if you're in a hurry to just fill a role, you'll still find yourself still doing that work. And so that person, you're paying them a salary, but they're not actually solving your problem for you. So if you suffer the short-term pain and take the time to build the right team, then you can free up a lot of your capacity to take on different responsibilities because you now have people who are running with specific things.